All right. It is 7:30. I'm calling to order the Planning, Zoning, and Housing Committee meeting of September 16th, 2021. I believe we have a quorum. We have, Amy will continue to take the roll call for me, please. But I think everybody that said they were going to be in attendance is now logged on. I don't know about Jen Moeller. She's the one that will potentially log on. We also have Steve Olvani that will be joining us as well at some point. So with that, I'm going to kick off the meeting. Let me just get my. Okay. Before we go too far into the details, I just wanted to go over a couple of new guidelines about electronic meetings that has been sent down from the moderator. We are until April 2022. No, I'm sorry. Yes, until April 2022, these guidelines will be in place. If anybody from the public requests all meetings need to be either all virtual or all in person. The RTM is for the remainder of the cycle is going to be all virtual. We'll in kind do the same. If somebody from the public within 24 hours of the meeting requests to be part of it, to be held in person option, we need to provide that. There is a room reserved. We have not been notified of that, so that is not the case for tonight. The thing that will affect us going forward, if and when we do votes on any items, if there is anyone that votes no, then it requires us to do a roll call vote. So we'll go through each one of the names and just verify the votes. It's not really going to have a big impact for us here, but I believe at the full body RTM, when you have to do a roll call vote for, potentially 100 people, our meetings might grow in time. So I'm just going to give everybody a heads up with that. And just to make sure when that happens and your name is about to be called, make sure you're unmuted so we can try to expedite that process on the next RTM meeting. Okay. With that, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes of April 8th. The meeting that we had after April 8th was a joint meeting with FMB, so we did not do that housekeeping, and I was remiss in taking care of that. So I know it was a while ago. There were no votes done at that meeting. It was just an update on for us to get updated on the regulations, the pending regulations, and updates on projects in town. Can I have a motion from somebody to approve those minutes? And all of those were sent in your packet. Okay.
So moved.
Marcy and Mike. Okay. All in favor? Okay.
Aye.
Any no's? Anybody? Not. Okay. All right. Then that passes unanimously. All right. Second up is the minutes of our joint meeting that was held with FNB on June 14th. Since my delivery of those minutes to all of you, there's been two corrections. We are referring to the plan as the state required affordable housing plan with regards to that grant. And then in addition, Susan Lauretson was in attendance. And so I've made that adjustment. So those two adjustments will be made to the minutes of the copy that I sent to you. Is there any motion to approve those minutes?
These are for the 16th?
This was for June 14th.
June 14th, excuse
me. Yeah, June 14th. Amy Chickles motioned, and any second?
So moved.
Carolyn Les. Okay. All in favor? Any no's?
Aye.
Is that somebody that said no?
No.
No. Okay.
I'm abstaining because I wasn't there.
Okay. All right. Liz is abstaining. Okay. All right, next order up, we will be discussing and voting on the FEMA-related acquisition of 27 Crimmins Road. I did send out the resolution that Wayne released today. I hope all of you received that in your email earlier today. And at that, I think there was also the ability to watch the Vimeo to get the background. I referenced that in the email. But in addition, there is the backup material that was also sent for the meeting. But I think I will, in an effort for time, turn it over to Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick summary as to why this is considered a severe repetitive loss, why this qualifies, and the guidelines, the milestones on, Board of Selectmen have approved, the planning and zoning provided a favorable report, and now it's coming in front of the RTM.
Sure. Jeremy Ginsberg, Planning and Zoning. The house at 27 Crimmins was built prior to the establishment of flood regulations, which came into effect in Darien in 1981. So back before 1981, you could actually build a house in the flood zone and not have to elevate it. And in this case, the house is actually in what they call the floodway, the area where the river channel, in this case it's Stony Brook, will run in a flood condition. It's not the area where the river would overtop its banks and you'd get flooded. It's pretty much where the water will go. So if you look at a flood map, this is designated a little differently. It's a very small property, and there's nowhere on the property to put the house other than in the floodway. It has, as Amy has noted, this property has flooded repeatedly. And when we say flooded, we're not talking about water on the lawn. We're not talking about water in the basement or the crawl space. They have repeatedly had water in their first floor numerous times in the past few years. Prior owners had that problem. These owners bought a few years ago. They've had the problem. And you can see that, I think you got a memo noting that they flooded in the first floor in July. They flooded again in the first floor in September. So we'll talk a little bit more about storm frequency, storm intensity. As Mike was mentioning before the meeting, the September 1st and 2nd storm, which was, I think, 2 weeks ago tonight almost, was about 7.9 inches of rain in Darien in about 6 hours. That is about a month's worth of rain in 6 hours. That calculated out to about anywhere from a 200 to 500 year storm. A storm that the odds are none of us would see in our lifetime. Of course, unfortunately it happened. And you can see that numerous homes and properties, both commercial and residential, got flooded throughout the town. And I know the selectmen are going to talk more about that on Monday night at their meeting about what happened and things like that. But going back to the property at 27 Crimmins, the town, again, when you think about this FEMA grant, you're like, wow, great. They were able to get this FEMA grant so quickly after the storm. No. They applied for this FEMA grant a while ago, not a month or two ago. They applied for this a long time ago. It's only now, coincidentally, coming before the RTM. And sadly, ironically, they got flooded again. The town applied for the grant, wherein we pay 25% of the costs and FEMA pays the remainder. The town has acquired properties similar to this grant, using this grant in the past. I believe it was a property over on Cherry Street, again, right near Stony Brook, which flooded repeatedly. So I think this will help solve the problem for this property permanently because the house won't flood anymore. It may help a little bit on surrounding properties because the water will have a place to go that's not occupied by the house. But again, when we talk about a storm with that much water, the amount of this property, the size of this property is so small. While it might make a little bit of a difference, might not be a noticeable difference. So I think it's in the best interests of the town, the best interest of the property owner, to get this house and this structure out of harm's way. And certainly it's, we've seen the damage that Stony Brook can do during certain storms. And I think it's, I'm very pleased that the town gets the grant. I spoke to Emergency Management Officer Mark McEwen the other day. There's not a lot of grant money through the state for FEMA programs and FEMA grants like this. So we should consider ourselves fortunate to have gotten 2 such grants in recent years. Happy to answer any questions about this specific instance and the grants. Or I will note that because it's an acquisition of property, the Planning and Zoning Commission had to issue a report pursuant to the state statute. I believe you all got a copy of their report. The report said that the purchase of this property is consistent with the town plan of conservation and development. So I wanted to mention that as well. Happy to answer any questions people may have about the proposal.
Mike?
Sure, Mike.
How many other homes do you think could potentially be impacted down the line, or are impacted a lot now in the size of the rainstorms that we've been having?
Well, there are numerous repetitive loss properties in Darien, and certainly, and that's the way it is in every town. There are just numerous repetitive loss properties, and I think what we've talked about certainly is looking at those first. You know, people who are flooding repeatedly. Frankly, not everyone wants to be bought out, and that's interesting. But we've talked to numerous people, certainly since in the past 2 weeks. Many people have spoken, either Mark or myself or Ed over in Public Works. And you know, it's not everyone that says, I would like to be paid and I will find another house somewhere else. Most people want to stay in Darien. Some want to rebuild. Some people elevate their house. You see a lot of new construction in the flood zone that's elevated as well. You know, we've talked about various properties. A lot of things have to fall into place for such purposes to occur, for purchases to occur. One is, you know, repetitive loss. 2 is, if we apply for the grant, we have to get the grant. And, you know, these are competitive grants where, and the bang for the buck that FEMA gets in Darien is not as great as they might get in other communities. And the people have to be willing. So there's a variety of factors at stake. But certainly there are a number of repetitive loss properties that, you know, may be considered in the future. Again, this is, I think, the second such grant, something like that. This does not occur that often in terms of the FEMA grant coming through and the town going ahead and determining they want to match the 25%.
During the presentation that was made to the Board of Selectmen, there was the presenter, and his name is escaping me, indicated that time is of the essence, and that you know, that we needed to kind of strike while the iron is hot with regards to the approval. Is there any time? Is there any expiration if we don't approve this? That it's going to be, these homeowners are going to be starting over and starting this application and having a long wait again?
I don't know the answer to that question in terms of how quickly does the town need to authorize the FEMA grant? I don't know the answer. I do know that the homeowners, my belief is they're not living in the house and they haven't lived there since July.
Jeremy, question. Apparently the house will be demolished if the sale goes through. How will that property be maintained and or utilized?
It will be considered the same as any other town property. It'll be made, you know, just like any other property that Public Works will cut the lawn or Park and Rec will cut the lawn. I don't think it's going to be dedicated as a park. So therefore it would be Public Works who goes out and cuts the lawn area. I think that's one of the requirements, is it has to be kept open. That's part of the deal, and it can't be developed. It's a very small piece. I think it's about 1/3 of an acre, Liz, something like that. I don't think the town envisions public access. It's just a small piece right near Stony Brook that'll just be vacant like some other pieces the town owns.
I
Okay,
mean, from
thank
my
you.
understanding, nothing can be put there, like even like a park bench, because in theory that could get swept away and then clog up and dam up something down and create more flooding, so that it has to be open.
Nothing. And I think, Amy, that's an excellent point. What we saw in the storms 2 weeks ago is even things you'd think are nowhere near the water, because when the water overtops its banks, might end up in the water, and the velocity of the water brought some, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of things that are in streams and culverts that you say, there is no way the water can pick that up and bring it downstream. And sadly, it's there was a lot of things. And, as it grabs bigger and bigger things, it's more likely that culverts and pipes and waterways will get blocked. And then you're exacerbating the problem for folks downstream, because then water is really overtopping its banks because the water banks are clogged with whatever it is, whether it's leaves, twigs, logs, brush, picnic tables, who knows what. It's very sad.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Any other questions?
I have one. Jeremy, I know the property can't be developed, but I'm wondering if there's any way that because you mentioned that Parks and Rec or Public Works will come and mow the property. Grass is not necessarily, the best way to mitigate flooding. And I'm wondering if the property can in some way be used to try to mitigate flooding on neighboring properties through the use of, rain garden type structures or, different type of plantings as opposed to just mowing it flat.
I think that would have to be investigated, Carolyn, to see what FEMA would let us do in terms of, I'll call it planting or rain garden or something like that. I think that would be kind of the next step once the town purchases it, is to see what we can do and where the money would come from and who would maintain who would pay to install whatever it is, whether it's certain types of plants,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, number one, to construct, and number two, to maintain. So I think that might be a next step that the town could explore. I'm not quite sure, because of the small size of the property relative to the size of the watershed, the Stony Brook watershed, which extends, I want to say, almost to New Canaan and encompasses hundreds of acres. By that point, how much difference
Oh,
would a rain garden make? I mean, it might look great. Maybe you can do some pollinator pathway type stuff.
right.
Maybe you can plant some decorative stuff. But the question for the engineers would be, if we were to put in drainage or a rain garden, would that even be beneficial? And that's a question I can't answer.
Okay.
From my understanding, the FEMA guidelines are very restrictive to make sure that there is no adverse
Right.
exacerbation of flooding for anybody else, and as Jeremy said, it's a very big watershed area. So, and not that a third of an acre could really change the needle, but I guess it can. And so they're very, very tight on changing it. So I think the assumption that I think we all need to be under is that it will most likely just stay open. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Feel like we're ready to vote? Do I have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, Liz and Mike, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any noes?
Aye.
Any abstentions? All righty, we are unanimous. Thank you. All right. Okay, next up, we are going to open up the floor to Jeremy to give us an update a little bit about the new regulations that were in fact passed and the implications that it has on accessory dwelling units, some parking requirements, and the ability for municipalities to opt out of those provisions. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are not in agreement, but it just means potentially that we would retain our local control with the ability to opt out, so we can make a Darien-based decision. And what the thinking is at the Planning and Zoning Commission, at the Board of Selectmen level, on how our leadership feels about those ability to opt out, and what that would ultimately require our government body, being the RTM, to approve that. And so therefore, I imagine we're going to be asked potentially to evaluate that in short order in the next month. And so I've asked Jeremy to come and kind of give us a primer on what to expect and some key meetings that I think we should all pay attention to that are up and coming, and be in a position of informed position to when we do need to make a recommendation to the RTM. At that, Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. You may have heard over last summer, there were a lot of zoning and housing related bills floating around Hartford. And what came out of that really was what they call Public Act 21-29, which was signed off on by the governor, which had a number of zoning changes, but the two in this one bill. And so the first one we'll talk about is standards for multifamily parking. In other words, how many parking spaces should you have for an apartment unit? And obviously that varies town to town. There's 169 communities in the state, and everyone had a different standard. Whether it was based on visitor parking, how many bedrooms, just a flat out number. Darien, it ranged depending on where it was, what zoning district. In some zones, we required 2 spaces per unit. Sometimes it was more, but basically the new state statute says, starting on October 1st, the following is, or not, effective October 1st, the state sets the standard for parking for multifamily structures. For studio apartments, it's 1 space per unit. For 1-bedroom apartments, it's 1 space per unit. For 2-bedroom apartments, it's 2 spaces per unit, and anything greater than 2 is 2 spaces per unit. And with the caveat, which is very interesting, as Amy referenced, communities can choose to opt out of that standard and create their own standard, but they can only do so after a positive vote by both the Planning and Zoning Commission after a public hearing, and then followed by the legislative body, which in Darien is the RTM. If both of those bodies approve a different standard, then you can have a different standard. But in any case, we're only giving you a certain amount of time to do it. And if you don't do it by that time, boom, this new state standard applies to your community. So we've worked with Wayne Fox and his team about working on scheduling a public hearing on the opt-out. First, for the Planning and Zoning Commission, their hearing will be Tuesday, October 5th at 7:30. And Amy, you're correct. The RTM is probably going to take this up at your October meeting if Planning and Zoning has an affirmative vote. So I'll give you a little more background, but basically what the background on this is, there's folks up in Hartford and other parts of the state that had a strong belief that the amount of parking you provide or require for developers will have a significant effect on the cost of developing housing. So for example, if Mike Wheeler was building a 8-unit apartment building and Darien required 2 or 3 parking spaces per unit, you know, he can build on less and less of the space because he needs those parking spaces. Of course, Darien, the land costs are way, 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 way more than they are in most, if not all, other parts of Connecticut. So again, when they looked at this, they didn't understand that in Darien, we have a couple of things that are different. One is the land costs are different. And so the amount of parking doesn't really make an impact on the cost of developing in the housing. What's really is the land cost. And 2, there are many parts of Darien that if you don't have a car or you want someone to visit you and there's no parking on the property, there would be nowhere for them to put their vehicle. And that's the way the Planning and Zoning Commission looked at it for, say, a 1-bedroom apartment, to not have any extra parking spaces for visitors, or say a couple who shares a 1-bedroom unit and they each have a car. You can think of some of the streets you may live on. Where would they put their car and be able to park it overnight, especially sometimes in the winter? You know, there's lots of streets in Darien that don't allow on-street parking in the winter. Or if you live on like say Hoyt Street or Tokenique Road, you can't park in the street. So again, the commission said, you know, our standard is here. The state required standard is here. Let's lower our standard. And the commission did that in a recent vote a few months ago. I think it was in July.
Yep.
To lower and reduce the existing standards in Darien, but not quite as low as the state has put in this requirement. And the thought process for the commission was, look, we're not quite yet buying into the big reduction by the state, but we acknowledge that maybe we don't need all the parking we've been requiring through the years. So let's reduce it a little bit, see how things go, continue to monitor, and we can always reduce it in the future. But once you go down to the state standard, you can't go back up. So the commission's thought was, let's reduce it, because once you hit the standard, you can't unreduce it, so to speak. So that's why they're having this hearing to discuss the opt-out, what their thought process was, what they believed are the valid arguments and the reasons for opt-out. We have not yet looked at other communities to see how many others are deciding or voting to opt out. But that wasn't really the commission's focus, because they said, look, while it's interesting to know what other communities are doing, we have to do what's best for Darien. And Darien is not like Stamford, and Darien might not be like Norwalk or Bridgeport or New Canaan or Tolland or Union or Mystic or Groton or Danbury. We have to go by our local conditions, and we acknowledge that many people have cars, and many people who live in Darien, if you don't have a car, yeah, it might be a little difficult to get to a train station, a bus stop. You can always call an Uber, but you know, it might not be as walkable or able to get to a grocery store or a train without a car. So they acknowledge that many, many people in Darien own cars, and to close our eyes to that fact would be disingenuous. So I think I've outlined some of the reasons and thought process. I know we'll be talking a little bit more about it on October 5th. If the commission votes affirmatively on October 5th to opt out, we will be bringing it to the RTM on October 27th. So that's the parking issue up front. I don't know if you want to take questions on that first, Amy, or you want me to talk about accessory dwelling units next?
Does anybody have questions about the parking component? And I will, Jeremy referenced that the commission did discuss and set new guidelines. If you want to reference that, I think it was from the July 13th meeting.
That's correct.
And if you just go on the website, either you could watch the Vimeo, but if you want the summary, you could go to the minutes of that meeting, and then there's a good printout of that. So any questions regarding the parking discussion?
So are you saying the proposed version of Darien parking alternative rules is contained in that Vimeo?
Yes,
Okay, so you guys have already figured out what your suggested rules are.
yes.
Can you give us the cliff notes on that? I mean,
Uh,
or if that's too complicated, I'll just go back and look, but
Yes.
Amy, I don't have the sheet in front of me. Sadly, I didn't bring it with me. I could look it up right now.
Yeah.
Um,
I have on the July 17th, there's the, I'm sorry, July 13th, there's the adopted resolution that has the recommended parking and all of the details around it. In addition to a couple of other things. It's not too far afield from what the state is recommending. So we did, there is, I'm gonna just put this up for you. There is
thank you.
a
Yep.
chart that really gives a good summary. It's on page 27 of this adopted resolution or recommended resolution, and it gives the existing parking conditions for studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. Right now are all 2.5 per unit. What the proposals are, what the state bill was, and what our modified proposal is. So in cases, for instance, the new bill is saying studio 1 bedroom, where the proposed P&Z is 1 bedroom, state is 1 bedroom, 1 parking. Our proposal is 1.5. 2 bedroom is 2. We've kept that, our proposal's 2. And then anything greater than 3 bedrooms, the state's recommending 2, and our modified proposal is 2.5. So it's really not too far afield.
thank you. I just want to get a sense of the differential. Thank you.
Okay, and there's also some other great information about that, because it goes into more details about if you're providing parking and what kind of screening and how far off of setbacks and, you know, accessibility, those kind of things. So I think it's a good read.
I look forward to it, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on parking? Okay, all right. Jeremy, are we, the ADU timeline is into next year, correct?
That's correct. You know, the same state statute, Public Act 21-29, also created accessory dwelling units. If you think of granny apartments or in-law apartments or whatever you want to call them, the state's saying if communities do not opt out of that, they are allowed in the community. And that's something the commission will have to deal with. They gave us until next year to sort that out. Currently, Darien does not allow accessory dwelling units, accessory apartments, or anything like that. The commission has started its discussions. They haven't really drilled down yet onto whether they wish to allow them, don't wish to allow them. If so, under what conditions and where. That'll be something for them to focus on starting in early 2022, because the state statute gave the commissions a little more time to sort that out. So once we get through the parking situation, and that their next focus will be thinking about accessory dwelling units. Do we want them in Darien? If so, under what conditions, by right, by special permit, what approvals might be needed, et cetera. So we do have a ways to go on that, but I will alert you that that too will likely come before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the RTM sometime in 2022. I'm not so sure the commission wanted to go with the standards that the state set. Again, no decisions have been made. We haven't drilled down into the details, but I think the inclination of the local Planning and Zoning Commission was to be a little more restrictive than the state, but we'll see. So I don't want to get into too many details because I really have nothing to report, but it's really something that we'll focus on next year. I'm glad you brought it up, Amy, because similarly, if the commission decides to opt out of the state standard, we will have to bring it before the RTM, and whether that's April or May or June, I don't know.
Okay, so to the extent that, you know, we're on this committee next year, this is a topic that when you hear about it and you see it come up on the agenda for the commission, pay attention, because most likely we'll be expected to report on it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Jeremy, can you give us an update just on other major development projects in town, how things are progressing? I have heard some scuttlebutt about Federal Realty, and is that did their drainage that they engineered and installed operate as planned in some of these last rain events? These are some questions that I'm hearing out there in Darien, and if you can just, number one, give a highlight on some of the key projects and where we are, and in particular comment on that too, that'd be great.
Sure. We'll start with the Corbin project, which if you've been to downtown Darien, you've seen that within the past month, David Genovese and his team at Baywater Properties have taken down the gas station and the other two buildings on, I'll call it the east side of Corbin Drive. And they're working on digging holes in the ground, putting in underground parking and drainage. That work will take probably a year, but you can see the benefit of that project now, where when you're standing at the post office, you will be able to walk across the street and walk to the Goose or 1020 without going all the way out to the Post Road or all the way to Old Kings Highway. So certainly right now it's as bad as it's going to get, and it's only going to start looking better from here. That's, I'll call it phase one of David's project, and that'll be this year into 2022 is I think it's three new buildings on that side of the street. We'll talk about Norotan Heights Shopping Center, the Palmer development, which is, I'll call it west of Palmer's Market. The Palmers are about to submit an application to planning and zoning over the next few weeks to modify their previous approvals. So the Planning and Zoning Commission will likely have a hearing on that in October, and I have not seen those plans yet, so I can't comment on them.
Okay.
But you're likely to see that come back to the commission with some changes from the original design. You're correct, Federal Realty continues. The new Walgreens opened a few months ago. If you haven't been in the building, it's a big improvement over the old Walgreens, and you can see kind of the new building starting to come to life. Sidewalks along West Avenue, landscaping on West Avenue. A lot of exciting things going on, and they will be at that quite a while longer, but it's moving along nicely. You're right, Amy, the drainage system was installed. I did speak to the engineer, Craig Flaherty of Redness and Mead, and he was good enough to go out, look at the numbers, and that drainage system that they put in, and I think Mike was saying it holds almost 1 million gallons, maybe it's 900,000 gallons of water, plus or minus, that it did hold that water, and it did reduce, believe it or not, it did reduce the amount of flooding on Heights Road, but for the type of storm we had in September, which was 7.9 inches of rain in a very short period, it still wasn't enough to save some of the nearby commercial properties, which is too bad. But that drainage system was a benefit to have and will continue to serve the town well in the future. Talking about some other projects that are ongoing, John Vaccaro's project at 1897 Post Road, which I think is the corner of Post and Dickinson.
Yep.
Is coming along nicely. The former bank there, he's moving along. He said he'll be done with that project in a few months. The other application you'll hear more about in October is Parklands Office Park. You may recall a few years ago, they built an assisted living facility in the old Parklands 1. They took down that old office building. Now there's a small office building in the back, kind of between the assisted living facility and Selleck's Woods. They're looking to take down that small office building and put up a new apartment building. So we'll have a public hearing on that in October. So a lot going on in Darien, a lot of projects. Things are still doing very well, and obviously a lot of houses going in, a lot of pools throughout town. So the workload is during COVID moving along, let's say.
Mhm. And how's the Ox Ridge school building project coming along?
Everything I hear, it's right on schedule, right on budget. I have not heard anything other than that. As Steve Ovani noted, they were able to open school on time. Certainly they had to make sure that the buses could get in and out unobstructed. And everything I hear, it's going well.
Okay. When I was catching up and watching some of the Vimeos, I did notice that the marijuana dispensary approvals from, that we're wrestling with now that marijuana is legalized, how's Darien going to handle all of those aspects of that quote industry? What are key things that we need to be mindful of? Because I imagine that might be a hot topic in our community, and things might, we might hear things as committee members that citizens that are concerned about certain things. What are key dates or processes that we should be aware of and follow?
It's a good question. And as I mentioned earlier, we had this Public Act 21-29, which dealt with a whole host of zoning issues. There were more zoning bills this year than ever. And you can see there's work that they require us to do on parking and accessory dwelling units. And sure enough, at the same time, the cannabis bill came through, and I've been working with Wayne Fox on the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission in terms of deciding what to do. What we've heard is many of the local Fairfield County communities have decided on a moratorium on dispensaries. In other words, the Planning and Zoning Commissions have said, you know what, we're not sure how this whole thing's going to work. We're going to vote on, instead of deciding where to allow it, we're going to have a moratorium for a year or 2 years or whatever the town decides, to think about it, to analyze it, to see how it's working in other communities, the benefits, the drawbacks, and then revisit it in a year or two. I think Westport's looking to do that. I think Greenwich might be. I think Norwalk might be as well. Wayne and I have been working on that issue. Is what are other towns doing? Steve Ovani and the Planning and Zoning Commission asked us to do that, see what other communities are doing. And I think the commission is going to have to figure out what they want to do, whether to allow it, and if so, where, to not allow it, or to have this moratorium, which is let's wait and see how it all turns out. So we'll know more about that over the next few months.
Okay.
But it's just one more thing that's on their plate right away.
Jeremy, you mentioned it past with the retail. There's no occupancy, fortunately, on the retail side. But what's happened to the office park occupancy of the office buildings around Darien?
It's interesting. Office buildings, what I've heard through the grapevine is office buildings in a downtown setting are doing better than office parks, is what I've heard. The commission over the past few years did loosen the regulations for office parks to give them a little more flexibility. And that's one thing that the Parklands application is all about, is the commission did allow in certain circumstances office buildings to be demolished and turned into apartment buildings. Because as you said, the demand for office in an office park setting is a little soft. And so we'll see how it goes, but that's what I've heard is when you say office, you're really talking two different types, downtown and suburban, if you will.
Jeremy, is there anything being looked at for Henley School because of the flooding they recently had? Are they going to do any kind of mitigation, or is that just repairing?
Amy, that was a good question. That is the first time I had heard in my years here about flooding at Henley School. I don't want to say it took people by surprise, but it was certainly unexpected, because while we talked earlier about flooding in places we've heard about, repetitive loss, places, or you look at the town's flood maps, you can get a sense of places that might flood. I don't know what the situation was there. They did get water in the building. I think it might have been just the basement, but I'm not sure. I don't know if it was a specific unique circumstance relative to that storm. And thus, I don't know if there's a need to come up with a permanent solution if it was just a certain thing happened. So I'd have to defer to Mike Lynch, who works in the school system, to find out what caused it. He would know a little bit better, and they may be able to avoid that happening in the future.
Okay. Any other questions for Jeremy while we have him here? Okay. Jeremy, any other things that you think our group needs to be, balls we need to be watching coming down the pipe?
I will say one thing that you may have heard about a few years ago is our desire to go to more online permitting. We went live with that August 23rd. What we found, it's got a very good reception from the general public. So if in the old days, you'd have to fill out all kinds of papers and you'd fill out paperwork. It's all done online now. And you upload your plans, you scan your plans, but basically instead of writing everything out in triplicate and giving separate paperwork to the building department, you just go into this new system and you type everything in. It allows people to pay by credit card or electronic check, which is a benefit to a lot of people, especially businesses, engineering firms, attorneys, et cetera. And, you know, there's convenience to members of the public. And we review everything online. And so there's more interaction between us and members of the public who submit their permits. You know where it stands in the whole system. But the other benefit is any member of the public can log into the system and see the status of a pending building permit. So rather than someone having to drive to town hall, hey, I see there's construction going on at, 2 Renshaw Road. Can you tell me what it's all about? I'd like to see the plans. Do you know who the developer is? You can just go online, pull up the permit, look at the plans, kind of take a look. So from that standpoint, we're finding it to be quite beneficial. Again, we've only been working with it for a few weeks, but we're excited about its potential. It's tough learning a new software system, but we've seen that it's going to be the wave of the future in terms of minimizing the amount of paper in our office.
Okay. Well, that's all I had for the agenda plan for this evening. One thing I want to just bring to everybody's attention, the next, or just upcoming dates, the next RTM meeting will be on the 27th of this month, virtual. Again, keep in mind, we're going to have some new guidelines. So we might be asked for, full roll calls on certain votes. Our next committee meeting will be October 7th. I anticipate that we will be discussing again the parking opt-out will most likely be something we're going to need to report on. So that at least impact will be on the agenda. The last RTM meeting of this cycle, believe it or not, is at the mid-October, October 18th, I think, and then we're into the next cycle. So that's all I have for everybody.
Amy, could you repeat the next P&Z meeting is, what is the date?
October 7th. Our committee is.
Our committee.
Yeah.
Oh, October 7th. Yeah, got it. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Amy and Marcy second. All right. Meeting is adjourned at 8:20. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks,
Right.
Jeremy.